Great. Thanks everyone for coming. I'll call the meeting officially to order of our Upper Bench Commission. I did hear from Senator Collmore, who expressed his regrets that he wouldn't be able to be here today. For some commitments, conflicts that he had. But thanks to everyone who was able to join us with the change in room. Find that. So we'll move on to approval of minutes from when was the last meeting? May from the May meeting.
May 9th.
Anybody want to make a motion to approve minutes from the May meeting?
I'll motion to approve the minutes from the meeting.
Okay. Second. All right, so I have a motion and a second to approve those minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. Okay, next item on the agenda, OHV license plate. Chase is going to present this. And so to be clear, this is just because by statute this commission is informed of OHV rule changes, correct? So we're not taking
this
action
isn't
on
a,
this,
this
we're
isn't
just
a,
being informed.
yeah, no action. It's just us advising on the OHV license plate, which here it is, although it's black. Not really this is a thing on that. So with our OHV license plate, we needed to create a rule defined in statute, an administrative rule on the mounting of this plate or the where it's located on the ATV, which the statute does provide some definitions, and then Shane and I clarified that more to be just a little bit more clarification on that. So that's all that this is. I know it's advising that that's what we're moving forward with on our avenues.
I think you got it. It also pertains to display of the sticker on the plate.
Yeah, because we still have the decals like a motor vehicle, the smaller decals on the corners of those of the month. But
I have a question. So I assume this applies to like side-by-sides. What about, four-wheelers, snowmobiles, other types of vehicles?
yeah, so these are defined as our off-road or the OHV registered off-highway vehicles. So the 10 license plates separate street legal on that. So it would be for ATVs, it would be for UTVs that are not street legal. And those are the two defined. It was going to be for snowmobiles, but that was not. So we don't do that.
And motocross?
Motorcycles, you're still not required to have a license plate on those for an off-highway motorcycle.
And off.
But if it's a street legal motorcycle, and those aren't considered off-highway vehicles like the UTVs are.
And I like the reason it shows brown instead of.
It was not me, it was Brett Stewart who picked 10, but I like it. And that's why we moved our OHV carts to 10. So
So it's not blue like for boats, it's brown like for land.
exactly.
Sand.
Like we pick things up as
I'm glad you explained that because I thought it was just like cheaper than putting an arch or a skier on it.
Okay, so that's the rule or have to rule it's been drafted, or are you in process?
we're in process, we're advising, and we have the language, now we have to submit them.
We'll submit after this meeting to the governor's office and the Office of Administrative Rules. And then once the governor's office has had a chance to review, assuming there aren't any changes, it'll go through the 30-day public comment process. 7 days after that, it'll become a permanent rule. So here within the next couple months.
Okay, so it would be like effective as of, a bunch of months from now.
Exactly.
That's it. Enforceable.
And it's just clarifying that, so a lot of the statute already reads how the plates to be mounted, but it does specify that the division shall create a rule defining it a little bit more.
Yeah, right now, they are being issued, they're on vehicles out
They're on
there.
ATVs.
Officers are enforcing it. So
Yeah. They're on ATVs, it's just how they're mounting it, and that's where the public needs to, where to place it on the ATV.
About 90% of the placement is covered in the statute. So, but we were required to make an administrative rule under the terms of the statute. And so I think that what we did here is we clarified that it should be mounted on the furthest back part of the vehicle, and it should be mounted securely such that it doesn't swing or fall off. over rough terrain, and that the plate and the sticker should be clearly visible. But otherwise, it's pretty much just a recitation of what's required under the terms of the statute itself.
That was not from this meeting. It was an email chat. So
All right, that's it. All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
thanks, Chase.
Okay, next item, statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation fund, SCORP updates.
Okay. Okay, that is me. Let me share my screen really quickly here. Okay, let's see. So, jumping ahead. All right. Well, my name is Carly Lansche. I think I've met most of you. I'm a staff member here with the Division of Outdoor Recreation. I'm a recreation planner. But I wanted to just jump on and take a little bit of the time on the agenda today to talk about the SCORP, which is a statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, which is totally different than the planning process that you all have been tasked USU, whom we'll hear from in a moment, to carry out. So I wanted to just give a kind of quick overview of the SCORP, kind of where we are in the process, and then talk about some of those just defining differences between those plans. And I can try to summarize it and make it pretty quick. The SCORP stands for the Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. I'll try not to talk in too many alphabet soup acronyms, but every state is required by the federal government through the National Park Service to complete a SCORP, basically to kind of check the box and formalize that we can administer the Land and Water Conservation Fund dollars. So Evan, he's another staff member. He's our brand new LWCF administrator, which we haven't had a full-time state funded position in Utah yet to focus solely on that. So that's his primary responsibility. And we are tag teaming that with Patrick, myself, Tara, Jason. We're kind of the core SCORP team. That's kind of a general overview that we have to do this every 5 years. And it really will help provide direction for where the SCORP dollars are spent. Tara, do you want to talk about how SCORP LWCF has been used?
Explaining how this has to do more with parks, and what you have in a typical municipal or county property where, are these parks, there's a lot of people that have actually asked us in our grants, can you fund these sports courts, especially pickleball courts? Can you help us as we replace this 25-year-old playground equipment with something that's safer and so on? And this, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, that to some extent, I would say is still inadequately, but we still getting a good idea of what is available in the communities to date, what the desires are, what the needs are, what the trends are. Obviously, pickleball's a huge trend. And then what I'd like to also add to that is I would really like to see this provide some real data for us to see whether you can get to park or green space, especially in our urban areas, because in rural areas you can walk out, and I feel like, just walking along a roadway and being, next to some fields or public land that I'm faced. But when you are in an urban area, can you walk 15 minutes and find yourself in some green space or a park nearby? And if that's not the case, what can we do to help those communities to get more of that?
Yeah, so thanks, Tara. And just to kind of point out, because I know we've got a lot of new commissioners here, and thank you so much for your time. Just to clarify the kind of 3 different planning pillars, I guess you could say, within DOR. One is the SCORP to check the box and help harness and steer those land water conservation dollars. The other is what you'll hear about in more depth and what you've been hearing about in more depth from Dr. Jordan Smith with USU. And then finally, the outdoor recreation planning assistance program, which is a program that we just kind of started over the last year, and that's what I lead to help provide technical assistance to smaller communities that maybe don't have grant writers or staff time with time and capacity to develop plans and go through all the stakeholder engagement and things like that that are necessary before you build a new trail system or things like that. So that's where my role is in the division, and really fun. Get to help out a lot of fun communities with different things. But so yeah, just wanted to clarify that there's kind of 3 different ones. So any question?
I
Yeah.
have a question for you, Carl. So as you're doing this analysis and creating the strategic plan, I'm curious, so at the municipal level, there's a study that Utah State does, a well-being survey and study is focused at cities, but a big component of the wellness score that cities receive is about access to different recreation assets, parks, trails, and open space.
Mm-hmm.
And since that data already exists, if you haven't looked at it, and since we clearly have friends at Utah State
Yeah.
who may be able to access whoever is doing that study, that might be handy data where they've already tracked at least a subset of
Mhm.
cities and
And
that metric.
Your expertise and your awareness of these things is exactly a good segue, because we're trying to tap some of you all to join our kind of technical committee to help kind of steer and oversee this plan. So maybe I will.
I want to beat Draper on the wellness score.
Bring it.
Healthy competition.
Currently score above my city.
Talk about a healthy competition. You want to?
it.
That's why I'm
That's awesome.
totally obsessed.
Right. So I'll just try to go through this super fast, but and thank you so much for saying that. So yeah, I kind of highlighted our core planning team for this effort, and then we are going to be bothering you all for if you have time or energy and capacity to help join in either a technical committee to help kind of with the nitty gritty oversight, or a bit broader stakeholder meeting where you can help us figure out what kind of gaps we might be having in our outreach, and just kind of provide a little bit more of the kind of 3,000-foot view feedback. And then the technical committee will be kind of in the weeds, reviewing more materials, kind of that quality control and assurance. So I will be emailing you. You already are on this commission, so don't want to tap too much of your time. I know you're all busy, but I know that you're on this commission for a reason, and it would be great to.
Can I add something to that, since Scott's sitting next to me? Traditionally, this has been with state parks, and I want to include state parks and golf courses in this. And not that I'm going to volunteer Scott anything, but I would say that we would love to have somebody from state parks in one of these, because we'd really like to include the data from state parks. And you
We
know,
would be happy to participate.
You're not being voluntold. You're volunteering. No, just kidding.
Yeah, but you can volunteer anybody.
Great.
So we can talk more about that.
Yeah. Awesome. And I'll send out an email that kind of is basically everything I'm showing you.
But golf
Today.
courses are included in that. I should add.
Oh, and I should add, there's a little one pager here that Evan and Rachel on our team helped put together. There's a QR code. And if you want to receive email updates on the plan, or kind of look at the core pillars that we're talking about using to guide the plan, you can read about it and sign up there. So yeah, thank you, Tara. Not going to go into all of this. We're hoping to, get things kicked off and rolling. Looking at, this is actually kind of wrong. Our first TC is technical committee. I work for the government and I love acronyms, so I probably use too many of them, but we'll actually be kicking it off in July. Just wanted to present this all to you. So we're in a bit of a tight timeline because we have to get it approved through the DNR oversight, and then we have to go through coordinating with the Park Service, and that can take some time. So we're trying to kind of move this along in haste. And I think this is a good segue for the update that that Jordan will have for us in a moment. Here are the kind of the core pillars that are on this one pager here. I'll put that in the chat too. but we're really just building off of a lot of the work that USU has been doing in this bigger strategic plan for the state, and not trying to duplicate any efforts, and just use the analysis that they've done to provide kind of a foundation for this plan. So does that make sense? Any questions or concerns or?
Any questions from the commission before I jump in? So what I'm hearing is that this is focused mostly on like municipal type of outdoor of recreation opportunities, maybe with some state parks, golf courses, things like that. You mentioned funding. How much funding is available on this?
I believe it was
But 8 million people.
Yeah,
8.2 million.
8.2.
But that is
was-
because some of it was left over from the previous year. There is usually much less than
I think it's
that.
around 2 to 3 is what the state gets
Yeah, that's
per
just
year.
got some leftover funding that was, I would say not enough funding. And there's certainly no, state funding, and LWCF has to be matched 50-50. And there are a lot of federal, regulations and things that you're including, that you're agreeing to as you take those grant funds.
So there's a process that municipalities can apply for a grant, basically a grant application process, and you administer that.
Are
But
you
it
saying,
all gets submitted through the state. So basically, like the state's in charge of like the final submittal to the feds.
And then they have to
That's take
approve
a
it.
whole year to agree.
It's like
I'm sorry.
So each
super
individual,
painful.
so each individual
Yeah.
project gets submitted to the feds, and then they,
Yeah.
and they green light each
But
one.
the state double checks and makes sure everything's in place before it gets submitted. That, that's the, this team will do this. Sure, and then it's a slow process from the feds.
so Terry, what do you, in, maybe you know too, Pitt, are the, cause I've never submitted one of these. Are the, restrictions or hooks that the feds have, are they really too onerous for?
So
Especially small
sometimes-
cities?
So if you have a park so here's the easiest one. If you have a park that was once purchased with land and water conservation funds, and you're wanting to update things on that park,
So we
pretty
want to
straightforward,
make the playground, all abilities compliant now.
whatever you want to do.
Okay.
If it's already been funded with land and water conservation funds in the past, pretty straightforward. You can just go ahead and do that. It's gonna be a lot easier to get approved. If you've got a raw piece of land that you purchased and you're wanting to start, now you have to use all federal regulations on that, even if it's municipally owned. So you have to do all the environmental clearances that you would normally do with the federal responsibility. And in perpetuity, it becomes recreational land. And if you ever decide that, hey, the development has grown so much around here, and we need the space for building a high school, and this is a particular community here in Salt Lake County, and you do that, now you are blackballed from ever getting any land and water conservation funds until you replace that in its value for value. It's not necessarily 80 acres for 80 acres. It is, oh, this one, it was really valuable. Even though you got a $28,000 price that you paid in 1968, well, this year it's worth millions. So,
Yeah, those are interesting. hurdles.
and if you use it for a trail, if you use it for just a segment of a trail, half mile, oh no, that whole trail now becomes under the same federal guidelines.
There's still a lot of strings attached. Buy American on it.
Oh, are you stuck using the labor standards like?
The Davis-Bacon.
Yeah, Davis-Bacon, and the
I
union
think it's like-
apprenticeship programs.
I believe so. Yeah.
And that makes that not very attractive.
Yeah, it's definitely not something for everybody, but the existing ones are where they're the most value. Like, for example, the playground at Mueller Park, right there next to junior high, that's a LWCF site.
I think the real, at least from my experience with this, like, that's why the money's not getting used because of this. But if the state can help identify a large project where you could use a lot of money, right? Like that's why I feel like small communities, like it's not worth getting into all of these agreements and ties for, you know, playground equipment and an upgrade of the park. But if there's like a piece of land from whatever, right, that the state is interested in preserving in the future for, again, you got to be careful, like that it's not something that's going to want to be developed in the future, but some large ticket item, like you're going to go through the effort, like for a lot of money as opposed to just get $50,000 or $100,000 for park upgrades or something like that. You know what I mean?
Good example is the Raging Waters site.
And this is a map that's on our website, and it shows all of the different LWCF projects throughout the state. So you can go in and see how many. It's a long-standing program, so there's a lot of
And every
successful.
5 years, our LWCF person is required to go and inspect and make sure it's still hasn't been changed over. I will say one project that came through this year that is like ideal. One city, Mill Creek, was told by their engineers, hey, this is our geologist, this is a fault line here. You are like right at the apex. You can never build anything here. And so they went to Regional Park and they're like, that's the only thing you can build. So that kind of thing is really ideal, where you can never put anything there because of the way it's geologically.
But if this commission identified, you know, again, through like, right, like we need large scale campground someplace in the state or something like that, that we, you know, in confident that you're not gonna be able to do anything else with, like, you know, you're not gonna be able to build homes on it, or you're not gonna be able to, you know, it's not gonna expand to something else that's outside of a conservation kind of mindset. That's what the commission be like, yeah, like let's try to help the community go the LWCF, because if the feds will pay for half of it, it's a win, right? But again,
Jason, what were you gonna say about the Raging Waters property? Yeah, so that's something that Salt Lake City's looking at to declaim that site and establish a community recreation hub. So that's very large scale, a lot of different parts.
have they applied for LWCF? Or are they?
They applied for Orlando.
The Outdoor Recreation Legacy Program.
But the
project?
unfortunate thing is, and maybe I'm just breaking this news, is so it's supposed to be in a certain area with very low income level, you know, poverty area, and they massaged the data, so to speak, so that it only applied in the way that they submitted it for those to the age of 18. And that's not the way it's supposed to be done, so it's going to be rejected.
Or last time?
Yeah, so they're out of luck and they should apply for LWCF next year.
Well, that was an LWCF crash course and a SCORP crash course, an overview. So if you have any questions about that, he stepped out, but he and I and Patrick, we are all over that project. So feel free to reach out to us anytime.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the statewide strategic plan update from Dr. Smith.
Great, thanks, Representative Stanquist. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thanks for showing up today and allowing me to give you an update with where we are at now with the strategic planning process. Thanks everyone who was able to come to one of the spring workshops, which we wrapped up just a little over a week ago. Those are always a big lift and a lot of travel throughout the state, but I appreciate everybody making the time. I'm going to run through a little bit of background for the new commissioners on the overview of the strategic planning process and how each of the individual tasks that we have outlined for supporting the development of the strategic plan, how those tasks tier into the specific objectives, and then the major policies, projects, and programs that we are going to be proposing to be recommended by the Outdoor Adventure Commission as part of the strategic plan. So the overview of what I really want to talk about today is where we're at with the project scope and the task-specific reports. Talk a little bit more about those spring workshops, which, as I just mentioned, wrapped up about a week and a half ago, and then have a little bit of a discussion on the Cardinal Directions and the Objectives, which we presented back in May before the spring workshops got started. So just to provide some guidance and maybe a refresher for those who have not been involved in the strategic planning process from the beginning, the proposed scope of work that we laid out was really to complete a series of individual tasks, all of which gave us individual pieces of information, data, insights on stakeholder perspectives from around Utah on critical projects, policies, and programs. And that each of these tasks would individually support a specific recommendation or an objective that is within the broader strategic plan. So if you're thinking about how the strategic plan is organized, this is generally the best way to do it is that there will be a broad strategic planning document that is very high level and it has the specific objectives and policy, projects, and program recommendations within it. Those broad objectives and the policy, project, and program recommendations will each be pulled from one of the five tasks that we've completed along the way of developing the strategic plan. Those 5 tasks included completing the development of a statewide outdoor recreation asset database, where we were compiling information on the geographic location, the size and different attributes for campgrounds, trailheads, boat ramps, and other traditional outdoor recreation facilities across Utah. The second task, which was to compile information on outdoor recreation programs. This is the task which you've probably heard the most about. It was the task that we had completed first, and it's the funding analysis and really looks at that landscape of how Utah is supporting outdoor recreation through a dedicated funding stream that is specifically required to be used for outdoor recreation management or development. The third task was to project outdoor recreation demand, and this is a task that we're continuing to work on, one that's still in process or underway. And the fourth task was to conduct a comparative analysis of Utah relative to other Western states. We have completed that, and we shared that information back with the Outdoor Adventure Commission in March, I believe, at one of the OAC meetings. And then our fifth task is the stakeholder workshops. So just to put each of these tasks out there and let everyone know that the structure that we are using to frame the strategic plan is to have each piece of data that comes from one of these individual tasks be a specific piece of data that is being used to support the objectives and the policies, projects, and programs that are being recommended in the broader umbrella document that is the strategic plan. So is there any initial questions on that broad structure? Is that clear to everyone on the OAC? Is there any kind of ambiguity with where we're headed right now?
Jordan, do you want to mention where the that's recreational survey and how that fit into the?
Yeah, we are considering that a component of Task 5 as far as the public engagement stakeholder workshop piece. So the survey component is built into that Task 5. Another way to look at this timeline, this is what I had presented back in March of 2022 to everyone with where we are at on each of these initial 5 tasks, as well as the OAC meetings and the plan development that you'll see there at the bottom of the list. But for most of these tasks, we are either complete with them or are very, very near to complete with them. The development of the statewide outdoor recreation asset database, we have all of the data compiled. We are now in the process of just packaging that up and getting it ready to share with the Division of Outdoor Recreation. The development of the outdoor recreation, of the evaluation of the outdoor recreation programs and information, that funding analysis, that was, like, as I mentioned, the first piece that we had done. and was shared with the Outdoor Adventure Commission back in January. And we now have the final formatted version that is already up on the Division of Outdoor Recreation's website. The projecting future outdoor recreation demand is one piece that we are continuing to work on, and is the only piece right now that we are a little bit behind schedule on. We had planned to have that done in May of 2023 and are now still working to finalize that. Our analysis is done, but we're in the process of writing up the report. The next task is that analyzing differences between outdoor recreation in Utah and comparable states. And that's one where we have, as I mentioned, presented that to the OAC back in March, and now we're just in the process of formatting the final version of the report. So the broad picture here is that for most of these tasks, we are now either complete or are very near completion on the major tasks that are supporting the objectives and recommendations that we will be presenting to the Outdoor Adventure Commission for their approval. Just to provide some review of those 4 cardinal directions that we presented that came out of our fall planning workshops. They were to, number 1, build and support partnerships. Number 2, to improve awareness and education about responsible recreation. Number 3, to develop infrastructure where there is demand while conserving natural landscapes. And 4th and finally, to increase the economic and health benefits of outdoor recreation throughout the state. These objectives have changed very, very slightly since we presented them initially to the Outdoor Adventure Commission in January, mostly for a little bit of clarity, maybe for integration of an additional construct or concept where it wasn't readily apparent. But they've generally been very well received in our spring planning workshops, with everybody in those workshops generally picking up on one specific aspect, one of these cardinal directions that they really saw was imperative for moving outdoor recreation forward in their particular corner of the state. I wanted to walk through each of these tasks just to provide a little bit more insight with where we're at. The first, as I mentioned, was the statewide outdoor recreation asset database. Right now, we have all of the available and provided data that was collected for, well, put in quotes, traditional outdoor recreation assets. So we have all of that compiled and collected into a geodatabase that is here at Utah State. We had initially proposed in our project proposal to turn all of this data over to the Utah Geographic Information Center, the AGRC, for them to manage it and update it in perpetuity. But there's been some ongoing discussions between the Division of Outdoor Recreation and AGRC about who would actually house and manage that database long term. And right now, based upon our discussion with the Division of Outdoor Recreation, it sounds like that's going to be managed in-house by the Division of Outdoor Recreation. So we're planning right now to package that data up and share it with the Division of Outdoor Recreation so that they can then steward it and manage it in perpetuity. Right now, we have the database compiled and packaged, but we don't have the final report of detailing the sources of all of the data, the database structure, and everything that the Division of Outdoor Recreation will effectively need to manage and steward that database long term. So this is one of those tasks where we are effectively complete and just have to put a few pieces of reporting together to make it useful for the Division of Outdoor Recreation moving forward. The second task, which was the funding analysis, was presented to the Outdoor Adventure Commission back in January. We do have a website up that is, or a link to the strategic planning process up on the Division of Outdoor Recreation website now. So if you go to the Division of Outdoor Recreation's website and look under commissions, I believe, or governance structure, it's under the Outdoor Adventure Commission tab. And there you can find a specific link that talks about the Outdoor Recreation Strategic Plan. And it has links to each of these individual reports that will be coming out to support the findings and the objectives that are in the strategic plan. This is the funding analysis and the major objectives, just to remind the OAC commissioners of where we landed with this report. We had essentially three major objectives that fell out of this report. The first was to increase the ability of municipal, state, and federal entities to access and share resources. This really fell within the broader cardinal direction of supporting and promoting collaborations and partnerships across different entities. In this report, we really hone in on the need for consistent language in state code on what outdoor recreation infrastructure and assets are across the many different pieces of legislation and programs that do provide assistance to outdoor recreation infrastructure development. And that includes everything from state code for the administration of UORG grants to TRT. There is not a lot of consistency in how they are referring to outdoor recreation infrastructure and assets, and subsequently probably some confusion on how municipalities and counties and other partners are seeing themselves being able to capitalize on those assets or on those resources as potential sources of money to develop outdoor recreation infrastructure. The second objective was the need to maintain outdoor recreation assets so they continue to provide public benefits to the public for decades to come. We have talked about this, I think, numerous times about the need to provide more funding and adequate funding to maintain outdoor recreation assets long into the future. In the report, we've added a small piece that looks at the appropriate ratios of investments in maintenance, operations and maintenance costs relative to infrastructure development costs. Right now, the state invests about a 10-to-1 ratio of infrastructure development to operating and maintenance costs as a whole. But when you look at individual programs, it becomes very, very different in how outdoor recreation is supported for capital investments relative to maintenance. We look back at the historical investments within the state parks program, and actually there you see a much more significant portion of their budget going to operation and maintenance as opposed to capital improvement projects, with really the capital improvement projects being supported significantly less than operating and maintenance costs. So just a good signal there that there needs to be adequate and appropriate resources to maintain outdoor recreation infrastructure long into the future. And that really is going to depend upon what type of infrastructure is being developed, where it's being developed, and who's managing it. Kind of thought given to what those long-term maintenance costs will actually be. And the third objective that fell out of this, it's mislabeled number 1 here, but it's the third objective, is to foster a sense of stewardship for Utah's outdoors. And we noticed in this funding analysis that we had a lot of different programs that touched on education and awareness to some extent, but not very many of the programs had a specific mandate to do so, in that it was maybe a broader portion of establishing and promoting tourism, or it was a broader component or a smaller component of administering the off-highway vehicle or boating programs. And so there's an opportunity to actually specifically mandate or grow the funding pools that support those programs, so we can get more youth engaged in the outdoors and provide opportunities for safe and responsible recreation. Just a quick recap on that report. Any specific questions on those recommendations? Those were, again, ones that we have talked about at least a few times before.
So is it anticipated that some of these specific recommendations would be in the plan, or just they're just sort of like in addition to the plan, just some recommendations at this point?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Representative Stanquist. So again, to kind of give everyone the overview of what we are considering the kind of heart of the strategic plan, it's effectively what you're seeing right here. The cardinal directions are the broad orientation for how you're making investments in moving policy and programs forward as a state. the specific objectives or effectively the strategy for why you are wanting to move in that direction. And then within each of those objectives is your more tactical, specific policies, projects, and programs of how you achieve those objectives. So we've gone into the strategic planning process really wanting to identify, what are those strategic objectives that can move outdoor recreation forward, and then highlight the specific policies, projects, and programs that tier into those specific objectives. So what I'm referencing when I make those specific recommended objectives, these are the objectives that are coming from that particular piece of analysis and might be supported through a very specific policy, project, or program. For example, integrating outdoor ethics into the K-12 curriculum is a very specific way that we can improve awareness about education and responsible recreation. So these are ones that will be reported on in both the individual task-specific reports as well as that broader strategic plan. And this is really going to be the core of the strategic plan, pending the revisions that will come from the spring workshops.
When I read through some of these, I guess my only question that I'm asking myself is just how specific with some of those tactical policies, procedures, and programs, support, like if you go back to that previous slide, right? The one that you just had up with the objectives and the cardinal directions. Yeah, so looking in on some of those, like a recommendation to integrate outdoor ethics in the K-12 curriculum or supporting educational programs. I think that's a good level for what we might want to specify. I don't know that we would want to get so specific that we say like move money from this account over to this account, things like that, like the real nuts and bolts will still have to follow from this. So it's still this is, even though it's getting to that third level, more specific and more tactical, it's still pretty high level.
Yeah, that's a very good read, Representative Stanquist, and exactly where we are trying to find that balance of providing the direction that state legislators, as well as resource managers in the field, as well as the state DOR and other allied agencies across the state can tap into that as a specific need or as a specific tactic that can be used moving forward, but not overly specific that it only applies to one agency or only applies to one particular region of the state. So we're not going to be recommending, develop a specific number of trails in this particular community or this particular set of counties. They're going to be general enough that they can be applied statewide and then adopted at a local level to the extent that local outdoor recreation providers, elected officials want to do so.
A question on that. So this sheet here, is this an older version of the Cardinal Directions? It seems like the wording reverted back to some of the prior wording that we talked about.
This version here is an updated one with regards to the major policy projects and programs. I believe that was with Jason. Sorry, I cannot see you right now. But I do notice there was a small change here on the Cardinal Directions for emphasizing economic and health benefits. And I do realize that we did not change that on this particular slide, but that was reflected in the updates and actually was discussed with all of the constituents in the spring workshops after we had made that change.
Well, I would anticipate also with this commission, when the draft plan is available, there'll still be opportunities to make little tweaks to it before it's finalized. And
yeah, and that is, I think, the process that we're working through now. Some of these have been revised based upon the consistent discussions that we had heard in the spring workshops, and some of them will need to be workshopped a little bit more with the Outdoor Adventure Commission to get them just right before the strategic plan is finalized. All right, I'll jump back into where we are at with task 3, the analysis, and this is again the analysis of projecting outdoor recreation demand across the state for different regions and different types of resource units and different types of activities. So the analysis and reporting on this is still in progress. Well, the analysis is complete, the reporting is still in progress, but the major objectives, just to kind of preview those, we'll be highlighting this in a much more detailed presentation forthcoming for the Outdoor Adventure Commission, but to really support infrastructure development in urban areas where demand is rising a lot faster than in rural areas of the state. We're consistently seeing that in a lot of outdoor recreation activity and frequency of participation, particularly increasing much more rapidly in urban areas across the state relative to our rural areas. And then the second major objective there is to support capital improvement projects that upgrade and expand existing assets that have or are failing to provide assets. So there's several areas around the state where there's notable outdoor recreation assets that don't have the appropriate outdoor recreation infrastructure in place to support the level of demand that they're currently experiencing. So this is just a couple of objectives to preview those that will be forthcoming in this report. But that is that analysis has been complete, and we're in the process of writing up the report now. But you can kind of see here from this graphic that does come from that the draft version of that report, where we look at different outdoor recreation activity trends across the 5 major national forests within Utah. You can see that the number of forest visits primarily along in the Wasatch Front, being supported by the UN Wasatch Cache, dramatically outweigh, in some cases by an order of magnitude, the outdoor recreation participation rates in more rural portions of the state. So we'll be reporting on this in much more detail within the next few months, maybe at the next Outdoor Adventure Commission meeting at the end of next month. The comparative analysis looking across the 11 Western states. Again, this was a report that we had completed and shared with the Outdoor Adventure Commission in April or March of this year. Major recommendations that came out of this was the need for increased active planning for ongoing outdoor recreation infrastructure development and management needs. It has been very good to see the Division of Outdoor Recreation put an emphasis and more of a priority on planning moving forward. And there has been recognized a need for that in our spring workshop series as well as our fall workshop series to keep the momentum from the planning workshops going, and maybe even leveraging that as a way to provide potential projects that could be proposed to the Outdoor Adventure Commission as a source of, or as projects that could be used for the outdoor adventure infrastructure restricted account monies that the legislature is being tasked with taking recommendations from the Outdoor Adventure Commission for. So the recommendations that came really from this report is to support ongoing and active planning, make planning much more an integral part of tying a lot of the agencies together. And we really see the Division of Outdoor Recreation being the linchpin or the connecting hub that pulls a lot of these organizations together. It was great to see the Outdoor Recreation Initiative bill passed in the previous legislative sessions, and I think that this is a good signal that there is support for these coordinated efforts across the different entities that are involved in outdoor recreation, and the recommendations that will come from this report or that are in this report now are really just to continue those planning processes and make them much more routine. And we see the Outdoor Adventure Infrastructure Restricted Account monies as being a great carrot to put at the end of those planning processes. In other states that we've talked a little bit about before in our previous meetings, with Colorado, they have regional coordinating councils that are not specifically funded they do not have specific mandates to build anything new. They're not specifically given a responsibility of determining how to spend state dollars. They're just funded by the state to plan and coordinate activities. I think this is a critical opportunity for Utah to say that we can actually fund planning processes as well as infrastructure development processes, and that we actually have that carrot at the end of the planning process to motivate regional working groups to get together and plan these large scale infrastructure development type projects. So that was, again, specific objectives that we've talked about a little bit before, but any specific questions on those objectives or the recommendations that you see here?
Looks good, thank you.
The last task was the regional workshops. We've done 14 of them now, so thank you to all the commissioners as well as the DOR staff who put in a lot of miles to come around to the workshops. Again, these were used to solicit feedback on the Cardinal Directions and Objectives. So we really presented the Cardinal Directions and Objectives as a work in progress to stakeholders across the state, saying this is the direction that we are going now based upon the feedback that we got in the fall workshops. Does that align with what you're hearing in this particular corner of the state? And generally, we've been very, very pleased in the feedback that we've got. It seems like different regions really specifically honed in on one particular objective, on a set of cardinal directions that really aligned with their needs. And those differ depending upon whether you're in the Wasatch Front or in a more rural portion of the state. So there's a little bit of something in each of those cardinal directions and objectives. I think for everyone, it just allowed different stakeholders to really tune in to the ones that they really wanted to talk about. So right now, where we're at in the process of taking all of the data back from the spring workshop series is that we compiled a list of potential recommendations or potential revisions to the objectives that we had presented to workshop participants. And we collected all that information on those digital whiteboards. If you remember that from the workshops, we're now in the process of just trying to synthesize those and come up with some common themes across all 7 regions, and maybe a couple of the glaring exceptions that came out of 1 or 2 regions in particular that might be worth discussing with the Outdoor Adventure Commission. So this is one where we're right now just a week off of the last workshop and distilling a lot of our notes and trying to combine those into something that will allow us to identify common threads and common trends across the entire state. So again, this is really what we're working towards. This is the outline of what these objectives are, and then those major policies, projects, and programs are effectively how we get towards them. A few minor revisions here based upon the version that you saw earlier in May, but I really wanted to use the time that we have here today to see if there was any general feedback based upon the spring workshops or specific pieces of insight that the Outdoor Adventure Commission members wanted to see reflected in these policies, projects, and programs, or even in their broader objectives that we haven't really emphasized to the extent that they should be, or that you think were reflected in your discussions at any of the spring workshops.
I think this is Kelly. I'm online. I'm really excited to see that establishing the regional councils made it onto kind of this draft version, because I think just from my own personal involvement with some regional planning initiatives and then hearing the feedback from the workshops that I was able to participate in, that was a really valuable experience that the participants really took a lot from, just being able to interact with each other in that kind of a setting and share their priorities. And, you know, they were even sharing and solving problems at some of those workshops. And so I think it's really exciting to see that show up under the build and support partnerships as a policy or program that kind of came out of the workshops that were done at the state level.
Yeah, that's good to hear, Kelly. sorry, Jason, if I could just respond. I think that was a critical discussion that we have had as a team, is that the state now is in a really nice position of leverage with having the outdoor adventure infrastructure restricted accounts to be used as a piece of leverage to establish partnerships and build a lot of that local planning in a more formal way. I think that the state has done that in a very limited capacity in the past. So as far as we see it as an external entity looking in from the outside, the state really has two paths forward with how you make recommendations for using the outdoor adventure infrastructure restricted account funds. One, you look at it from the perspective of, we're going to use the same tool that we have to administer all of our other programs, which is a very robust grants program, and you just use that same tool to solicit programs and projects from various interests across the state. I think that might be a little bit short-sighted if you actually wanted to build up some of these local collaboratives that could then develop projects that really do meet regional needs and that are very, very large scale. And so that's an alternative that we see has a little bit more promise than just an open grant process. And then that might be also considered.
So Jordan, Darren Bush from Pike County. I kind of came into this process. You were halfway in the middle of it. So I apologize if this is a dumb question, but I participated in a Western Interstate Regional Conference event at Yosemite a couple of years ago. And Yosemite is a 1,200 square mile park. And they went through basically almost the same process that you have done here, which is the stakeholder engagement, the resource, evaluating what resources were available, right? The resource inventory. And what they found was that roughly 94% of the use of Yosemite was kind of targeted at 3 or 4 resources. There are 7 gateway communities to Yosemite, and yet, just like you're showing with urban demand on the resource, they found the exact same thing at Yosemite. So through their strategic planning process, what they did was they really focused on how do we bring and highlight and how do we move the demand, or at least the use, to other resources that they have within inside Yosemite. And a lot of that had to do with how they developed the gateway communities and what was at the gateway communities to get people to use other parts of the park. Now, mind you, that's a smaller scale than Utah, right? But my question is, seeing what you're seeing on demand and the demand data are part of the recommendations or potential ideas that would come out of this. Are they going to include how do we spread the use across other resources in the state? Because, I mean, at some point, the resource can only handle so many people wanting to recreate it, right? So.
Yeah, that's a great point, and a discussion point that has come up a lot in our regional workshops is that there's a lot of areas around the state where there's, I think, a perceived overcapacity of outdoor recreation demand. I also think that those are areas where there has been an inadequate investment in outdoor recreation infrastructure to accommodate that level of demand. So that's really where we're trying to get at with that third cardinal direction, is develop infrastructure where there is demand while conserving natural landscapes. The vast majority of outdoor recreation activity that happens very proximate to home. It happens on very short trips. And so a lot of that demand can be alleviated by providing the adequate and appropriate infrastructure where people actually are. So again, more development and more proximate development in areas where that demand is occurring, which is primarily in gateway communities and in the urban locations. And to the extent that it can be spread out or dispersed. I think that is a viable strategy that has to be thought about very, very carefully, of actually providing the infrastructure at the destination, as well as the appropriate marketing and promotion to get people to that destination. And we make this point in the funding analysis, where we really say that, there's a lot of different policies and mechanisms in place across the state that do somewhat different things that could be paired in a lot more strategic way. And this is one area where regional coordinating councils or more collaboration and partnerships could actually help identify where those connections are. For the example, using TRT dollars to support marketing and promotion of underutilized assets, and using UORG dollars to actually build those assets. So those two things happen to happen in concert, and when they can, then that will actually facilitate some of that dispersal. But when only one happens, when you're driving people to a destination that doesn't have the infrastructure, it's not going to lead to positive outdoor recreation experiences. And when you're driving people, you're building outdoor recreation assets that don't have any marketing and promotion to actually get them there, then you just end up with an expensive and underutilized resource. So those two things really have to happen in concert. And we point that out, and that there's a lot of different mechanisms in play, and some of these things really need that collaboration and partnership from the many different entities. And one way to coordinate those discussions is through regional coordinating councils that effectively are doing what the Outdoor Adventure Commission is doing, but at a relatively smaller scale.
Well, I could see along those lines, us maybe updating the wording a little bit on 3 and 4, because that third one down, develop infrastructure where there is demand, that sounds like developing infrastructure where there's existing demand, but what about those areas where there's the potential for more demand? So I could see us maybe tweaking that wording a little bit, and then it also then ties into the economic benefits, because there might be the potential for some more recreation opportunities in some area that's just undiscovered, undeveloped, that may or may not have an economic development component to it, but it may not. It just depends. So I think both of those things, we could kind of look at how that is focused, because I agree. I think one of the things is saying, okay, if there's certain areas that have inadequate infrastructure that are being used, then let's focus on matching the infrastructure to meet that demand. But then maybe there's other areas that we could disperse people. We just have to figure, or there would have to be an emphasis on the market and the infrastructure to be built out for it.
And capacity.
Yeah.
Right. But I think in that third bullet point, we get to that point where, while conserving the natural landscapes, but I think not just the natural landscapes, but conserving the capacity of the communities that also are supporting that. Right.
Yeah.
Paiute County has a lot of space and a lot of great places, but also at the same time doesn't have the ability to take the burden of a lot of promotion and there's a capacity there of what they can handle. So it's not only conserving the land and the landscapes, but also the community viability of it as well.
So that could set me, when it says develop infrastructure, we think of like hard infrastructure or capital improvements, but also it could maybe say something like infrastructure and services or
economic health or whatever. I know we get into economic, it's like the next one, but it's like how we conserve that it's economically positive and not become an economic drain.
Right.
Jordan, is there a place here in the presentation where I think you might have had the most recent cardinal direction wording, maybe somewhere back in another slide? It would be probably helpful to look at the most recent version versus the old. There we go. Yeah, thank you.
Just those ones. So
It just gets me thinking of like all the, not only like promotion and tourism, but then like Terry, right? With you, like, all right, what's going to require more investment in? If we are funneling people this direction, they get them off I-15 or I-70 or whatever into some of these communities. Like, what does that mean for our transportation solutions and things like that? There's all types of this that are going to have to be conquered or going to do a big recommendation of investment in just first minute.
I would add to that maybe too, I don't know how much of the demand projections took into account the population projections over the next several years, because I know that's something that down here in southern Utah we're really dealing with pretty acutely. I know that they're expecting, for example, the population of Iron County to like double by 2050, which is insane to think about. So I guess just keeping that in mind as in addition to just kind of those trends in visitation that we've seen to certain areas.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kelly, and that's really what's driving the vast majority of the demand for the growth in demand for outdoor recreation across the state is population growth. You look at relative to other impacts, other shifts in demand, such as climate change or hazard events, things like that. They are dwarfed in their level of magnitude by population growth. That's really what is driving the growth in outdoor recreation demand, is the number of people living within the state and where they're living. They're primarily living in the Wasatch Front, now in the Wasatch Back and in Washington County. And that's where outdoor recreation demand is increasing the most rapidly.
Commissioner Bushman, did you have something?
I was just gonna say, and you know, in Chase's organization over there in the OHV trail world, for the last 5 years or so, there's been a process underway to try and expose all of the opportunities for OHV recreation in the state, because primarily people were focusing on 3 or 4 major trail systems, and we had amazing trail systems in Tickapoo. We had amazing trail systems in the West Desert, right? But the populace didn't know. And so to try and spread that around so that, you know, you don't try and stuff everybody in like sardines on the Paiute Trail, you know, they undertook an effort to fund some additional mapping, 3D mapping, other things, to try and spread the wealth around a little bit. Because when people load up and they're ready to go off the Wasatch Front, you know, there's only 2 or 3 first of mind kind of locations to go, right? And so their organization, I think, to their credit, put a lot of effort into trying to expose the public to all the other opportunities. I think that needs to continue and be further promoted. But that's kind of what I was getting at with the question, is, you know, I think there's opportunities for that same type of and other forms of recreation, same efforts that they have.
I heard that in every session that I attended, that same sentiment that you're talking about. I think it's got to fit in that one cardinal direction somewhere. I don't think it's reasonable for us to say, wherever there's demand, that's where we have to continue to pour in more capacity for that demand in education. I just don't think that's reasonable.
On top of that, like I'm saying, again, the economic viability and as much as people claim they like to explore, I think when people recreate, they like the turnkey recreate, you know, they like to know that they can be in the car for 3 hours, they know where to stop at the Maverick, they get their gas and supplies, they know like where their campsites are, you know, like that's part of like the promotion and also being prepared like as a community like that, because again, we'd love to send everybody out to the West Desert, but
Well, it's a safer, more familiar place.
yeah, but there's a little bit of familiarity that has to come to that, and that's why people go to Moab, because they know like I can stop in Wellington, I can, you know, pass through Green River, and like
A certainty.
it's a certainty, right?
And
they
that's
like
the
to
reason right
now
now mapping, right? Let's give them certainty.
some certainty, right? Some familiarity with it, so they're comfortable with it, and it's not running the risk of I get down there and I get lost and they realize I don't have enough gas, I can't get my Bahama Mama or my drink filled up, like whatever it is, right? Yeah.
The other thing that I heard brought up each time was the wording in there of conservation. And I don't personally object to the use of the word conservation, but there were a lot of folks that felt like stewardship was a better fit.
So on that last slide, I think it showed the updated wording on the 4th cardinal direction. I really like that. I think the 3rd one needs a little bit of tweaking.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it. I don't know. We probably can continue those conversations and get it outside to the right point though.
Yeah, that third cardinal direction of developing infrastructure where there's demand while conserving natural landscapes is one that we did tweak a little bit to make it a little bit more concise. But based upon the feedback that we get and further discussion with the OAC, maybe there's a way to make that even more more concise and more appropriate. But I think that this discussion is right on, that there is a need for both promoting outdoor recreation infrastructure development and the education and marketing and promotion. And we see a lot of the connections there with not only the entities that are represented in the Outdoor Adventure Commission, but a lot of the policy and programs that are funding outdoor recreation across the state. And again, just to bring that up as a possibility that we really see and would really emphasize and recommend to the Outdoor Adventure Commission that if the Outdoor Adventure Commission is going to be the governing body for outdoor recreation within the state moving forward, that it needs to see itself like that and to seek out ways for there to be points of alignment between the missions and mandates of different organizations. And I think this is a critical one where that alignment can happen between what county DMOs and the State Office of Tourism does and what the state is now doing with the significant investments in infrastructure. And I think a lot of people on the ground are starting to put those pieces together independently, but there can be a lot more done when it's provided in a more formal structured way through the Outdoor Adventure Commission or through regional coordinating councils that can help facilitate those discussions and make sure that those investments are happening in a coordinated way at a more regional level, at least. So that was an update with where we are. Now, I would like to present the final work that has come out of the spring workshop series, as well as any subsequent revisions and the demand analysis that I had mentioned very briefly at the next Outdoor Adventure Commission meeting in a month, with the idea that can steer towards the continued refinement of these objectives and specific policies, projects, and programs that are then up for subsequent discussion. But generally, I think we're on a good timeline moving forward towards the fall with getting these last pieces of analysis written up and then having plenty of time for the Outdoor Adventure Commission to provide feedback and further input on what the final version of the plan looks like before it's actually approved and moved forward.
Great, that sounds, I agree, it sounds like we're on a good time frame. And now that, the workshops are completed, the data's been gathered, now it's really going to be coming back to this commission to really fine tune it and have approving the final months. So yeah, some interesting meetings as we refine that and really get it honed in toward its final form. So does that conclude your presentation?
Yeah. Thank you very much. If there are any additional questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I would just encourage you now, if you do have any questions about what the final version of these reports are now, the easiest place to get that, as I mentioned, is on the Division of Outdoor Recreation's website. It's now under resources. There's a tab, there's a bar at the top that says resources, and then governing bodies. Outdoor Adventure Commission is one of those bullets there, and then under the Outdoor Adventure Commission is the strategic planning process. So you can find the final reports as we get them posted. Will be up there, as well as any other updates that might come up in the interim of these monthly meetings.
Great. Any other questions or comments, items of business today? And, all in favor, say aye.
All right.
Thanks everyone for your time today. Very helpful. Thank you, Jordan.
Thanks, everyone.